Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is David Novak. I was asked a question recently by Gentle Reader. Are there books you'd recommend to someone at more or less college freshman levels of ignorance when it comes to structured/systematic study of poetry? And I began my reply by saying, it's a serious question. I'm not sure how necessary a comprehensive study of poetry is to anyone, though familiarity with a good handful of poems can make a difference in one's life. And I still pretty much hold to that. I don't think anybody really needs a systematic study of poetry. If you find a poet that you love, or whose work seems to speak to you, such as William Butler Yeats, a slim selected of his work is probably very suitable. I mentioned to Gentle Reader that in Paul Carroll's class, we used this textbook by John Frederick Nims, Western Wind, and it gives you different little exercises. It talks about different verse forms. Now this has been updated. John Frederick Nims died some time ago, and I can't speak for this updated version, but the original by Nims was very, very wonderful, and I'm sort of sorry I ever gave it up. I would rather have my original copy of that book than this one, and it has at the back an anthology which goes for maybe a good 100 pages or so. Oh, more than that. So I don't recall that the original edition had an anthology. The anthology here goes from 369. Oh, wow, it has an anthology about literary criticism, too. This is just a book I found in the neighborhood box, and I thought I would take a look at it. I obviously haven't taken much of a look at it. At my stage in the game, I hardly read poetry. So this is possibly the kind of book I might pass along to somebody. But this one served me very well when I was at a level of basic ignorance. I didn't know much of anything. I think there was some old book of Tennyson or somebody that my grandmother had owned that was still in the family possession, but nothing that really spoke to me. And so this really brought poems and poets into my ken that I had never heard of, and it was a good place to start out. I believe in one of the classes that I took a Poetry 101, and we used the Norton shorter anthology. When I was in Taiwan, I wound up buying a bootleg copy of it, and I have another. I think this is the second edition. I don't know, or could be the first yet. And I think I have the third edition in the shorter, and I also have the full thing. And as a general principle, I would probably stop around the third edition. The more you get into contemporary poetry, the more you're going to find poems that really have not been vetted by time, if you will. So I would recommend something like this. It was interesting to see the changes between these two. This one, I believe, has, on the average, slightly more poems by every poet, and this one has more poets. I think they were trying to rectify the error of having too few female poets, too few poets of color, too few Canadian poets, etc. And so they compensated by taking out a number of poems. But so these old shorter edition Norton anthologies, I mean, there's a lot of anthologies that you can go for. I just brought these out because they are the ones that I am most like to use. I'm most familiar with them. I have a whole cabinet full of poetry anthologies. And perhaps one day I should do a show and tell. But I'm trying to speak really to the question of the beginning introduction to poetry. And I should add also the caveat that anything I speak, what worked well for me in my day, 40 years ago or more, may not necessarily work for you. But this is what did work for me. After that, also in Taiwan, these are also bootleg editions. I came across the chief modern poets of Britain and America. So one book has American poets, one book has British, and they're modern. And the philosophy behind the book was to present, I think there's 10 in each book, 10 poets in each book, was to present a healthy selection of, oh yeah, look at, there's the copyright page. Now finding that, I've forgotten what I was saying. I think there's about 10 poets in each book, and the idea was to present a really good number of poems by each. Let me see if I can show you the table of contents. So it starts with Emily Dickinson. I believe the other one starts with Hopkins. So the elasticity in the definition modern at that point was that I think, was it Hopkins? Hopkins was so far ahead of his time. Oh no, they start with Thomas Hardy of all people. Okay. Well, Thomas Hardy, and then there is Hopkins. But that Emily Dickinson, although we consider her an old standard by now, her being published did not happen right away. And in both cases, Hopkins and Dickinson, the editors felt that these poets were so far in advance of their time that they deserved inclusion. But so you can see they've got what you've got. And there's a good section of Edgar Lee Masters. Now, I don't think Edgar Lee Masters would speak to anybody now. I liked him well enough at the time. I think a lot of this has dated. So there's E.A. Robinson. It's a good anthology to get a taste for these people, but and then there's a good, healthy section of Robert Frost. And I think Robert Frost is good to be aware of. A good section of Vachel Lindsay, who is mostly unreadable now. A nice Wallace Stevens. I know it's probably nuts to be trying to show you this. A small amount of William Carlos Williams and some Ezra Pound. And I think it's got most of the essential Pound. There's a few of the cantos, but just all of the even the bigger piece like Hugh Selwyn Mauberley. If you're interested in Pound, I think Pound is showing his age a lot more than T.S. Eliot. But Marion Moore is in here, John Crow Ransom, T.S. Eliot. These were wonderful. A good amount of Edna St. Vincent Millay, Cummings, and so forth. So, and of the last poets in here, you've got Richard Wilbur and Sylvia Plath. So there's very nice selections of the American. Let's see what the British is. I haven't looked at these for a long time, but these, as I was living in Taipei, just really taking my first forays into English verse, these books were wonderful to have. So we've got a good amount of Thomas Hardy, a very good amount of Thomas Hardy. Robert Bridges. Oh, that's got to be, oh yeah, Jared Hopkins, then Bridges. A.E. Housman, Yeats, a really good selection of Yeats. So if you're unsure about Yeats, you would not do poorly with this book, although Yeats is one that I would say you can easily just pick up a selected. There's one, I think, edited by somebody named Rosenthal, perhaps, and that will carry you very well. Then other names that Walter de la Mare, John Masefield, James Stephens, who I don't think ever spoke to me very much. D.H. Lawrence, I like his poems in there. Siegfried Sassoon, meh. Edwin Muir, Edith Sitwell, Hugh MacDiarmid, I'm not sure how you say it. His verse never did much for me. Wilfred Owen, of course, the essential Owen is in here, I would say. Robert Graves, and so forth. Dylan Thomas. The poets in these two books are not going to read as fresh as they did for me 40 years ago. That is clear. But if you ever happen to find a decent set of these in the used bookstore, it's worth your dipping into. I think now that probably the need for such an anthology is virtually non-existent when you can easily just go on to, say, the Poetry Foundation website and see what kind of anthology they have there. Almost every poet has poems up at their website. But I thought that I would share these books with you and then just talk a little bit about anthologies. While I was going into my anthology shelves, I came across a duplicate. I have this in duplicate, and so I pulled it out because I have to get rid of it. And anthologies, just in general, are a great way to really learn about poetry. If you want to focus on American poetry, particularly, the Library of America has a 5-volume set that is indispensable, really. But they also publish other. In fact, I think this is a Library of America one. They have other anthologies. They have a sonnet anthology. That's another way to go. I would particularly say there are so many sonnet anthologies that if you want to get a variety of poets, with each poet not represented in too many, a sonnet anthology would be pretty good. And Penguin has a lot of anthologies for different periods. So does Oxford. And they are really an indispensable way to get into a period, to find out whether you like an author or not. You can even take it further and go to the Everyman Library. They have all sorts of different pocket-sized anthologies where you get exposed to names that you're not likely to find in a I'm trying to think of the right word, sanctified anthology, something that would be used in class, because they have anthologies like poems about horses. And so in the book of poems about horses, you may find a poet that would not be represented in a standard classroom textbook anthology. So I just thought that I would talk a little bit about my anthologies. If you are new to the study of poetry, once again, I would say I don't believe a comprehensive knowledge of poetry is really necessary. What is ideal is to have a handful of poems. When I was young, I took a handful of poems and memorized them, probably about 6 or 7, and that served me well over time. Any poet, even the greatest, probably only has a handful that you really need. You're better off taking 5 or 6 of Shakespeare's sonnets from the anthology and really getting to know them than having the whole book of 154, I think it is, and just skimming it lightly and not really getting to know any of the poems all that well. I will leave this there. Thank you, gentle reader, for asking.